In this presentation, I'm going to show you how to take some throwaway materials and turn them into a lovely bowl and some serving utensils using some really basic 3D modeling, a 2-rail sweep, and some shape creation, and a couple pocket toolpaths. Back in 2021, Vectric became a huge sponsor of the Heart of England Forest charity. The charity is working to conserve a huge broadleaf forest for the benefit of the environment, the animals, and people as well. And their mission aligns really nicely with our environmental goals here at Vectric. As part of our monetary donation, we also donate some time. We go out there and we help to maintain the forest, plant trees, clear paths, and so on. During one of those visits a little while ago, we met one of the amazing workers there named Roz, and she offered us some pieces of felled wood that we could use to create a project. During our talk about what we might present at this 2025 user group meeting, I thought this was the time to do this. Now these have been sitting around for quite a while now, and as you can see, they're cracked, they're dried out, and so it was going to take a little bit of time to prepare these for the final project. This is the kind of stuff that you might do with any kind of wood like this. Removing the bark, stabilizing it, filling in some of the cracks, surfacing it, and all those kind of things that you need in order to be able to get started, even cutting a piece on your CNC machine. Let's have a little look at how I went through getting these ready for use in our project that we're going to create. So far so good. That worked out really well. Now, when it comes to creating our first little project, which is going to be these servers here, I needed to take a piece of one of those longer sections of tree and have it flattened down. I use exactly the same process that we did for this slice. Now, once I had that, then I could get the thickness of material that I had to work with. And that was important because before I did any of that, I was working with some really rough numbers, or would have been working with some really rough numbers. So once those are all been surfaced off both sides, I can get a really accurate measure of the material's thickness. So if we take a look into Aspire here, now we're going to need to have Aspire for this job because we're going to do some 3D modeling here, so you can't do this in VCarve Pro or VCarve Desktop. And I've got here a job that's set up, or a job sheet that's set up exactly the same size as my surfaced middle bit of that tree. So it's 19 inches by 3 inches tall. The 3 inches tall is a bit iffy because it's got those rounded edges, but it's close enough. Now, when I was thinking about these salad servers, the first step you need to do is to think about the profile or the cross section, and then also what it's going to look like from the top of your actual server. So in this case, this line here is the drawing that I'm going to use, or the vector I'm going to use to create the top-down view. And that all came from this little paper mock-up that I made. I'm a big fan of making these little mock-ups to make sure everything works out as I kind of expect it will. And so this little cardboard one that I made fits quite nicely into my hand, and I thought that it would be a nice little server in the end. So once I had that, I could go in and actually draw that top-down view. I'm not going to go into how I did that. Obviously, you should already know how to probably draw in your software, and if you don't know how to do that yet, then there's all kinds of great tutorials, and a lot of the other presenters in this user group meeting will have covered a lot of those things already, or will cover them. So I've got this nice vector here. It's a nice closed vector. And then once I had that, I could think about how the actual cross section of this is going to look like. So if I took a server and actually cut it right down the middle, Now, with this particular server, there's some unique things about it. One is that it dips below the modeling plane on one end, so we need to think about that a little bit. And then I've also added in, it's hard to see on this, but there's a bit of a thumb groove there, so you can kind of have a space to put your thumb, which is really quite nice. So, and that was kind of an afterthought, but I think that it was a good idea to add in there. So talking about the actual cross section we have here, this is the sort of the side profile. If you cut this right down the middle, this is what you would get. We've got this top vector to create the top side of our server. And then we have a bottom vector, which I've already moved to the other side of my job, to actually create the bottom of it. Now, as I just alluded to, this is a double-sided job. Both projects we're going to be working on are double-sided, so that's important to know. And I mentioned too, we're going to be using a 2-rail sweep. So I've got my 2 vectors that I'm going to use here to sweep those profiles along. One last thing I want to point out is that if I turn on my guidelines here, there's this box up top, and this box defines the actual thickness of the material that I've already surfaced. So in this case, if I click on it again, and then I have a look at the actual thickness of or the width of it, it's 9.5 wide, and it is about 0.75 of an inch thick. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, that 0.75 was a total fluke. I didn't shoot for that. That was just what it ended up being when I ended up surfacing down that middle piece. Okay, so let's go ahead and start to model this. So really, we're going to be using 2 tools. We're going to be using the 2-rail sweep and the actual create a dome tool. So the first thing we're going to start off with is we're going to use our 2-rail sweep. So we're going to select that tool. We're going to flip over to our 2D view for a second. We're going to zoom in just a little bit. And we're going to hold down our shift key, and we're going to grab both of our drive rails, and we're going to tell the software to use that selection. I got an extra vector selected there. That's why that error came up. So let's just hold down my shift key and unselect that. And now I can say use selection. And there we go. So the important things we want to look at here when using the 2-rail sweep is the direction of the sweep. So you'll see that if we zoom in on this red line, the arrows are pointing up. And if we look at the green line, then the arrows are pointing up. So everything is in check that way. We can grab our cross section, and then we can just make sure that we choose the proper setting here. So we don't want to scale the width with or the Z height of our profile with the width of our vector. I want to leave it pretty much the same. In this case, it wouldn't matter too much if I had that clicked on, but in some cases that's really important. We're going to sweep between spans. Again, it's just one of those things that we don't need to worry about. It's the top one that you really want to think about. We don't want to scale to a specific height because I've drawn that cross section to be exactly the height that I want it to be. So I don't want it to mess around with that at all. And I want it to be an add component. So we can rename that top if we'd like to. And we can click apply. And we'll jump over to our 3D view and have a look at that. And this is what we have. I think that's a pretty nice shape of a handle. And as you can see, like I predicted, we're actually dipping below the modeling plane here. You can see this sort of fuzzy, hazy area here. That's below the modeling plane, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So let's close this down. Now I only want to keep the part of that shape that I created that falls within this vector. So I'm going to grab that vector, hold down my shift key, grab that component, and I'm going to use the option here to zero everything or get rid of everything that's outside of that vector. So I'm going to select that, and you'll see now we have that shape that I wanted. And that looks really quite nice. Let's flip to the other side, and let's do the same on the other side. So let's flip over. And just to make life easier, because what I can do right now is I can see the other side at the same time that I'm modeling this side. Let's hide that for right now, because we really don't want to see that. It just makes it a little bit easier to see. In a second, we'll reveal both of them. Again, we're going to do exactly the same thing we did a minute ago. We're going to hold down our shift key and grab those two. Oh, sorry. First of all, we need to bring up our 2-rail sweep tool. We're going to grab these 2 vectors, holding down our shift key. We'll use those. I'm in the 3D view, so you're not going to be able to see those selected. So let's flip back to our 2D view again. Let's grab our cross section. We're going to make sure all the settings are the same that we had on the other side. And we're going to call this bottom. And we'll click apply. That's great. We'll close this down. Take a look at our 3D view. And there we have the bottom side of this. Now, we're just going to do exactly the same thing. Hold down our shift key, grab that shape, this vector, and we're going to zero outside of that so I can get an idea of that actual shape. That looks really good. Now, if we look at both sides of our job, you're going to see from the side what this will look like once we cut it in the end. And that looks pretty good. One of the things that I don't like about this particular shape is that it's really sharp on the edges, and I think that we can do a little bit of something about that. So let's go back to our other side of our job. Let's hide the back side just for a second. Let's look straight down on the top view here. We're gonna grab this vector and we're gonna create a small little rounded shape. I don't want a full bump. What I like to have is just a little bit of radius corner with a flat top, and that's going to give me a nice smooth side profile there. So with that vector selected, I'm going to go down to my modeling tools. Now, if you've ever played with any of your modeling tools, you know you have all kinds of options here. You can create a rounded shape, a pyramid shape. We can create a smooth shape if we want to, or we can create a shape with a custom profile. But for this one, we're just going to create a smooth shape. And we're gonna go and just grab this handle and we're gonna pull it up a little bit. And you'll see that it's creating the shape pretty dynamically right in the 3D view. So I'm gonna drag it up quite high. And as soon as I do that and let go, I'll be given some more options here. And I can crop the top of this down if I would like. So let's grab this and we're gonna bring this down. And you'll see what's happening now. I'm actually flattening out the top of that. I just want a slight little rounded edge to that. And when I close this down, that looks a lot better. It's a lot smoother. I think when we cut this, I already have some smooth shapes in there. You know, if you didn't want to bother with this particular component, you don't need to worry about it because you could just sand it down and round it off that way if you wanted to. But I like to try and get my model as close to what I need it to be in real life. So that looks really great. Let's flip over to the other side. Let's do exactly the same thing on this side. We'll grab that shape, go into our dome, go ahead and pull this up. Give it a decent looking shape, around 30 degrees-ish is fine. Let's drop this down a little bit, round those corners off just a little bit. And there we go, we can apply that and close that down. And let's look at both sides again, and we can get a really good look at what we're gonna have in the end. Now, I wanna go into my component tree just for a second and have a look at this. So right now we are on the back side. So let's go back to the front for a sec. Let's double click on bottom and that'll flip us all the way around to the front. We can have a look at this and you'll see we have two components. We have that top two rail extrusion that we did, or the piece that we kept. And then we have component one, which is that nice smooth kind of edge to it. And it's being added to the top of that sweeped profile that we made. The next thing I'd like to look at is making this little recess here. So we're gonna grab that circle. Oh, first of all, let's go back to our design tab, back to our pick tool. Grab that circle. We're gonna use the same thing. We're gonna create that dome shape. We're gonna give it a bit of a dome, and you'll see that it's being added to the top of this because we've got add set over here. Well, let's turn that into a subtraction. And now you can see what we have is we've got this dip in the side of our handle. And I think that looks pretty exceptional. Let's go ahead and close that down. And let's have a nice look at that. We can hide our vectors if we'd like to, so we don't see those. I'm pretty happy with that, but I don't think it looks like that oval is blending in very nicely. I'd like it to blend in a bit better. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab that shape, go into my component properties, and I'm gonna use our fade. Now, if you've seen any of the videos in the past that I've done, I love fading my components, tilting them, positive tilt, negative tilt, it doesn't matter, all over, I like tilting everything. So we're gonna fade this, we're gonna choose our 2 points, and we're gonna set 1 point here, and 1 point over there. And automatically the software will give us a 50% fade. Well, we're actually gonna fade that down until it almost goes away. There we go, and we close that down. And now let's have a look at that. I think that looks much nicer, a bit more, I don't know, like it's not an afterthought, more like it needs to be there. And if I'd like to, I can change the depth of this if I want to, just to kind of hone that into what I want. I've got all kinds of thickness here that I can kind of cut into. And what's really nice about the way that we display a front and a back is that I can actually sort of visually see how deep that is. And also, and we're going to use this again a little bit later, if I hover over top of that area and I'm looking at it in the 2D, or sorry, as a two-sided component, visualizing both sides are on. If I hold down my control key, you'll see down the bottom right-hand corner, excuse me, the thickness. So the software will tell me how thick it is in that area, and you'll see it's still pretty decent. It's 0.375 of an inch, 0.4 of an inch. That's still pretty thick, so I'm pretty happy with that. and I'm reassured that I'm not going to cut through the other side, although visually I'd be able to see that. But if I was getting close to the other side, I definitely wouldn't be able to see it. So having that little sort of reassurance that it's there is great. Again, two-sided job, both sides turned on. Hold down your control key, hover over the area that you want to check the thickness of, and there it is right there. Easy as that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, we have two of these. So I'm going to need to go through the process now of actually copying everything over to the other side of my job. So there's a couple ways I can do that. I can go to my clip art tab, or sorry, to my component tab, hold down my shift key, grab all of those, and then literally go Control, Shift, and H. And if I wait a second, they'll pop over to the other side. So that's Control, Shift, and H. Control means copy. Shift means across one of our axes, and H means horizontally. I could also have chosen vertically, and it would have done the same thing vertically if I wanted to, but that wouldn't have worked for this particular job. So now let's have a look at the other side. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to go to our component tree. We're going to grab all of these, and I see I've got a zero plane in there. Ignore that for right now. That's left over from something I was messing around with before, but we'll look at that in a second. Hold down my control key, Control, Shift, and H again. And what we'll see is in a second, that should pop over to the other side. And that looks great. That's exactly what I wanted. You can see both sides of those spatulas. They both look really good. And now we can start to think about how we're going to fixture these inside of our material. Now, if you've never cut a two-sided part where things aren't lying directly on the modeling plane, then we have a great video that you could watch about how to cut a 3D marlin. And we talk a lot about how to position your tabs along the edge of a 3D component. Might be something you might want to check out. So I'm going to touch on those a little bit here to help you kind of understand how this is all going to work. So let's flip to the other side for a sec. And we are going to look straight down on it. Double click on that because we're on the bottom side. Now we're back to the top again. We're going to go to our clip art, and if you've downloaded all the clip art that comes along with your software, you're going to have a section called 3D tabs, and we give you a bunch of 3D tabs. I can't use a profile toolpath to cut this out with two-dimensional tabs because of the I'm dipping below the zero plane and there's really no sort of common center point. I could do it, but I might be a little frigging around. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these 3D tabs. So I'm just going to grab one that looks decent. We're going to double click on this and we're going to take a look at that. Now, before we go too far, when I brought this in, if you look at my components, it's ended up on the same level as everything else that I've done. I'd like to put it on its own level. That way I can hide and show them if I want to pretty easily. So let's right click on the levels and I can insert in a new level. Mind you, I could also do that from over here if I want to. It doesn't matter. And then I'm going to grab up that circle tab and pop into that new level. Now the thing we need to think about now is this level is an add level. So anything I stick on this level is going to be added to the level below it. I don't want that to happen. I'd like it to merge in, anything on this level to merge in with what's below it. So we're going to right click on that, go to combine mode and switch it over to merge. Now you'll see what happens if I drag this into my actual job. It actually merges in, it doesn't add in. And oddly enough, that's exactly where I like to put my first tab, right there in the end. It's proud above the modeling plane. The tab is there, nice and easy to see. That's great. So now we're going to hold down my control key and my alt key and we're going to drag one across here. Great, so literally I've made a copy of that tab. Because they're merged into each other, if we look at my component tree, you'll see that they're merged in. Then they're actually going to look like one solid long tab. I could have just stretched that one out if I wanted to, but I may have just copied over, it's just as easy. Let's grab this one here again. I'll hold down my control key and I'm going to copy it. Now I need to find a convenient spot to put another tab. Putting it at the end of my spatula isn't a good idea because it's really quite thin down there. I could do it if I was desperate, but I'm not. I've got some nice thick areas on the side of this I can use. So let's just rotate this around and slide it into place like that. And we're going to hold down Control, Shift, and H again, and that'll copy it across to where it belongs on the other side. Now we're just going to hold down my control key again, and we're going to position another one of these up here. That looks pretty good. Control, Shift, and H again. And now I have all the tabs that I need in place. They're on their own layer, or own level, excuse me, and that'll make it so that if I want to, I can hide those, maybe to show this to a customer. They can take a look at it and make sure everything's okay, or I can hide it again, and now they're back in again. Now there's one last thing we need to do before we start thinking about tooling this up. As you know, if you've created any toolpaths in our software, that I don't have any limit plane to stop my tool from either plunging too deep on the other side as it falls off the edge of my part, or I have no way to stop it at all. So I need to add in what we call a limit plane. And again, if you've never used a limit plane before, that Marlin video will help you with that. But what I'm going to do is go back to my design tab again. I'm going to hold down my shift key and press the flat plane here. And that's going to bring me in a nice looking modeling plane here, or a nice zero plane. And you'll see that when I do that, I'll get a zero plane right here. I can hide and show that. But also it is a real thing. So I can move that up and down if I'd like to by adding or subtracting base height from it. So that's what I want to do, because right now I don't want to limit my cut to not get into this area here. I want to actually go past that. So if I go ahead and just drag this down, I can move it just below the lip of this one here, just below it. And don't worry about those little fingers that are sticking up there. That's just some stray pixels that have shown up from my other side where the two parts come together. I'm just going to remove those later on. It's not a big deal. And there we go. So now I've gone ahead and positioned that where it needs to be. You can see it's slightly below the edge, which is great. And now when my tooling happens, it's going to go down and just touch the top of that. And that's where it's going to stop, making sure that I get all of this nice area here below my modeling plane, and it'll allow me to actually cut past the edge if I need to, which in this case I do. I want to get past the cusping of my tool a little bit so that when I actually cut things out. Now, another thing that you're going to want to think about or just remember is that my cutout pass is going to be, or my last pass, or my last finishing pass is going to happen on the back side. So I'm going to go all the way to my modeling plane from the other side. It's not going to take into account this limit plane at all. We're going to go past that. So really I'm going to cut past this and get rid of any of the sort of the extra little bits of cusping that are there from the other side, which is a nice little thing to keep in mind. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now before we get into the tooling, we need to just collect up some vectors here. So let's go and turn on our vectors in our 3D view. Now luckily we have a profile vector here around the left hand spatula, but we don't have one on the right hand side. So I'm going to select that shape, go into my modeling tools and create a vector boundary that goes all around that. So we'll select that, and there we have a vector boundary. Now we can use these two vectors to think about how we're going to go and tool this up. And these, keep in mind that when we do create our tooling, that we are going to be using these vectors to limit our tool paths. Okay, so let's go ahead now and have a look at our tool paths. To do that, we're going to jump over to our Toolpaths tab, and we're going to start to tool the top side of this. Now, as you'll see, when you come to look at the footage of me actually cutting this, I come to the very edge of the material that I'm using. So be aware that when you do a job like this, if you do come close to the edge, you're going to need to think about that when you're fixturing things down, if pieces won't fall off, or you understand what will come off, so you can either remove it or whatever you need to do to keep you safe, okay? So let's start off by looking at our material setup. And we want to make sure that it's put, well, first of all, the thickness of material is correct. We're going to start at the bottom left-hand corner of my job. We're going to be zeroing off our material surface, and we're going to make sure that we put our job right in the center of our material. So by double-clicking on that center sort of minus sign there, or slash, or whatever you want to call it, it will put my job right in the middle. It's taking into account both the top and the bottom models that I have, or the front and the back, and sticking it right in the middle of my job. My rapid Z gaps are safe and appropriate for my machine that I'm using, so I'm just going to go and click OK. We're not going to recalculate any toolpaths, because what you will notice is that there is a toolpath already created there. That is a surfacing example. So this is the toolpath that I used to surface off this material. I left it there, or I'm going to leave it there, so you have a reference when you go to if you want to cut this and you're going to use sort of a roughly cut piece of material on how I surface it down. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to leave it there for you to kind of explore. I did use a 2-inch surfacing bit, so you can take a look and see how I set that all up. So as always, this is a 3D job, so it's pretty easy to do. We're gonna do a quick roughing pass. So we're gonna use a 1/4 inch end mill. So let's select a brand new tool, a 1/4 inch end mill, and we'll select that. We're gonna use the selected vectors for that. We're gonna go outside of that about a 1/4 inch. We might change that in a second, but we're gonna have a look at that. We're gonna leave about 0.01 of an inch behind of material behind. That way our finishing bit has something to come in and remove. We're gonna do Z-level roughing, which is super fast for this. And we're just gonna go ahead and calculate that. And you'll see that we got a nice roughing pass there. And if we preview that visible tool path, we're gonna get exactly what we want. And like I said, I get scarily close to the edges of my material with this. So, and you'll see that later. But anyway, just something to keep in mind. That's great, so let's close this down. The next thing we're gonna do is create a finishing pass. Let's turn back on our vectors again so we can make sure that we have the right one selected. We are going to remove that, and we're gonna select a 1/4 inch end mill, okay? That looks great. Oh, no, sorry, 1/4 inch ball nose end mill, we'll select that. We're going to use those selected vectors. We're going to use a boundary offset of about 0.25 inch. I want to go outside of that up to where we left material from that roughing pass. We're going to use a raster toolpath. I chose a raster because with an offset tooling, it's going to start in the middle and work its way out. And that might leave behind some witness marks of my tool or some cusping. And I really don't want to leave that behind. So what I'm going to do is with the raster, it's a little bit easier to sand out. And also it kind of follows the grain of the wood, so it'll look pretty decent. So let's calculate that as it is. And again, you'll see that little edge there where those pixels were kind of raised up. That's okay, we're gonna sand those off in the end. That's not a big deal. That looks really good. That's all there is for the tool path for the top part of this. Now let's quickly jump to the other side, and we're gonna do exactly the same on the other side. So we need some vectors. Let's take a look at our vectors in our 3D view. We'll see that we have one for the outline of this one, but I don't have one for the outline of this particular part. So let's jump back to our design tab just for a split second. With that selected, we can create a vector outline. So now we've got the 2 vector outlines that we need. We'll go ahead and hold it. We'll go ahead and start off with our roughing pass. So we are going to just be sure everything is like we want it to be. Everything's good. Yeah, perfect. We can unshow, actually we'll leave it just like that. Let's go ahead and unshow the other side so we can see better what's happening, because you can see the modeling plane or that limit plane that I put in. That's a little confusing. So we're gonna hide that for now. Roughing pass, same end mill, 1/4 inch end mill, selected vectors, everything else is exactly the same, and we'll calculate that. Except for I didn't have any vectors selected, so let's do that. Calculate that. And there we have a nice looking roughing pass. So let's preview that visible tool path. Looks really nice, happy with that. Close that down. We still have those vectors selected. You can kind of see them there. So let's go now into our finishing pass. Ball nose again. All the settings are exactly the same. We'll calculate that up. Let's preview that visible tool path. And we'll see what we're going to get. That looks great. Now we can't see both sides at the moment. So if we turn that on, double-sided, because I have that, I've already previewed my toolpaths on the front side, now I've previewed them on the back side, you can see exactly what we're gonna get when we cut that out. And that looks pretty nice. I'm happy with that. So now we can go ahead and save off the toolpaths and run them on our CNC machine. Now, keep in mind, I'm getting really close to my material, so I had to come up with sort of this unorthodox way of a hold down using masking tape on my spoil board, masking tape on the bottom side of my material, 1 screw and some hot glue. It worked for me. You can decide whether or not it's the right solution for you in the end. Let's have a look at how this cut on our machine here. So once those are all cut out, I did a little bit of sanding and then put a really simple basic oil finish on them, some oil that we had from IKEA. And I tell you what, they really came to life. They look really nice. I'm really happy with those. Now, one thing I didn't talk about was that this, like I said, this is a two-sided job, and I used the dowel method. So I actually have dowels in there. You would have seen that when I cut it out. Those will be included in the file, the dowel holes. I only used 2 dowels because also I had a screw hole that I could use to help line it up with. But anyway, overall, I'm really quite happy with those. So let's put those aside and let's talk a little bit about that large slab that I'm gonna turn into a bowl. Now, where we left that slab, we had it surfaced on the top and the bottom, filled with resin, or at least as much as I could get in there, at least the parts that I could see. And so now we need to think a little bit about how to create this bowl. Now, I'm gonna back it up a little bit and go on rewind just for a second, because before I actually took the bark off this and sanded it down and did all that work, I had to actually draw a reasonably accurate vector outline of the actual slice that I had. So to do that, what I did, and you've seen me do this before, is I put it on the floor, I put a ruler down next to it, and I took a picture of it straight down, as straight as I could. That way I could import that picture into Aspire and create a vector outline around it so that I knew approximately the size that I was going to be working with and where all of my bowl needed to be and so on. The lovely thing about having the ruler in there is I could size things up and down, that picture up and down, until I had it just right. Now, this picture isn't to scale anymore because I've changed a few things, so I'm going to hide that right now so we can look at the vector that I had. So this is the vector that I created around the outside edge of it, less the bark, because I kind of guessed that a little bit. And I could center in these 2 circles. Now these 2 circles I am going to use to create that dish shape in the middle of a bowl. This again is a 2-sided job, and we'll talk about the other side in a second. So to create the top of this, it was really quite easy. We'll go over to our 3D view for a second. Let's turn back on our vectors so we can see what's going on. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and grab these 2 circles here. I'm going to go into my create a smooth shape, and I'm going to use these 2 sliders to create the shape. Now, I don't want to use just a cupping or just a bowl because I want the edge to kind of be nice and round and kind of come in. And I can't do that with a bowl shape or with a dish shape unless I want to do a lot of sanding. And seeing as I have to do a roughing and a finishing pass anyway, I may as well just go ahead and incorporate that right into my shape. So I'm going to use these sliders over here to create a positive shape that I think is pretty close to what I want. So first of all, let's just go ahead and slide that slider there. All of a sudden, you're going to see I have this strange looking O. That's because I didn't tell it here to blend to my inner vector. As soon as I do that, it'll be corrected to be a nice shape like that. And let's go and move this down a little bit this way. So now you can see I'm getting at the base of my shape, this kind of raised bit, and it's going to go up to the top of my bowl. Now I can fiddle around with this as much as I would like to get the exact shape that I want. Something kind of like that. I'm going to scale this in the end to be a total height of 2 inches. Okay, that's important because that's as deep as I can physically go into this material because of the length of the bits that I have, the roughing and the finishing bit, and also the way that my CNC machine is built, the actual nuts on the collet and the actual whole top part. I can't fit any deeper than that at this current time. If I had longer bits, I could have gone deeper. I could have actually maybe gone all the way through this material if I wanted to. But I thought that with what I had on hand, 2 inches is a reasonably good and safe depth for my machine. So that's why I'm using 2 inches there. Now, you'll notice that, like I said, this is a positive shape, which isn't really all that helpful for what I'm doing. So let's go ahead and convert that into a subtract shape. That looks pretty good. And we're going to close this down. Now, that's great and all if this was actually this modeling plane was the surface of my material, and it's not. Okay, keep in mind that when I measured the surfaced piece of material that I had, it's actually 4 inches thick. So I actually want to raise this dish shape that I have up 2 inches. Now, I could do that by just adding some base height to it if I wanted to, but that's going to make it so that as my tool gets to the edge of the shape, it possibly could dip down and fall off the edge of my 3D model and create these really weird sort of divots around the outside edge. So I'm not going to do that method. I'm going to go ahead and use that 0 plane again. So hold down my Shift key. We're going to add in a flat plane. okay? I'm gonna click that plane because it is an object. I'll select it, and I'm gonna make sure that it's 2 inches thick, okay? So press 2 and enter. And now you'll see that it's raised up. So this is gonna be essentially the top of my log slice, and I'm gonna cut into it that dish shape. And that's all I need for the top bit. I'm not worried about rounding this out. I wanna keep the natural shape of my actual log slice. I think that's gonna be kind of nice. The only mistake that I made in cutting that was that I didn't do a great job centering that dish shape in the middle of this slab because it's an odd shape, and I had a hard time kind of sorting that out. What I ended up doing was it kind of centered nicely in the center of the tree, which actually looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. One other thing that I did, which is a top tip for anybody who wants to create or wants to print their actual project at actual size. That is to save off your 2D layouts as a PDF file. Load in that PDF file into your PDF viewer and then print it at actual size. And you'll see me use that in a little bit to try to find the center of my job, which again was kind of hit or miss in the end because of a couple things that maybe I'll cover in the live part of this user group presentation. For right now, we'll just leave it at that, okay? So that's that. Now let's go ahead and flip the other side. Now this is where me creating the other side, and it's hard to see, but you can see the hole here in the front. Okay, that actually in the bottom of this, and I haven't finished the underside of this yet, you'll see there's actually a sort of a dish on the other side of this. I did that for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to lighten up the weight of the actual slice, which was quite heavy. And also I thought it would just look kind of nice if it had that on the bottom of it. As you saw, I had to fill resin from the other side. So I wanted to make sure that I got the resin in as deep as I could. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to see all the cracks on this side. That may be unfounded. I'm really not sure, but I like the aesthetics of it anyway in the end. So now with the second side, I could have done a couple different ways. I could have gone ahead and 3D modeled an underside of this if I wanted to. This is where you've got to make a choice. You can either go through the process of taking the time, as we all know, cutting 3D stuff does take time, to model that, do the roughing and finishing passes, or I could have just gone ahead and used a pocket with 2 different bits, and that's what I chose to do. So I have here a bowl bit, a round bowl bit that I'm going to use as part of my pocket toolpath, and then I have this really nice 1/2 inch end mill that we had kicking around. Now, one of the things that was really quite good about this is obviously I have a 1/2 inch collet that a lot of you may not have, so a project like this may not even be possible for you unless you use smaller bits. But we have the luxury of using that nice collet, so I could use these 2 bits to my, better. They just turned out better instead of me 3D modeling, and it saved a ton of time. Cool. So to do this, I've got this vector. So I use the same circle that I used for the top part, so everything would look kind of good. And then I welded in this rectangle that kind of goes outside my shape. As you can see here, that way I'll have these handles. Again, hoping that it would be nice and easy to carry. And I measured that rectangle based on what I thought 4 fingers would be underneath that. So, and I think I did a fairly good job. So it worked out okay. Welded that together, and that's the vector we're going to use for our tool paths. So we're going to flip the other side for a second, and we'll go through our tooling now. You can't really preview both sides at the same time because it's not a full 3D model. You can, both sides are turned on here, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense here at the moment. So we're just gonna leave it as it is and make sure everything works out. So let's go ahead and flip over to our tooling for a second. So let's take a look at our material setup. We wanna make sure that the top side is all the way to the top. Our thickness of our material is around 4.635. Sorry, I thought it was 4 inches. Make sure that we start in the center of our job. We have an accurate measurement. Our model is positioned at the very top of our material. We're going to treat that modeling plane as the top of our material. Everything else is safe and appropriate. Keeping in mind that because of the distance I had from the top of my material to the nut of my CNC machine, I had to make sure that those were set up properly so that I wouldn't trip my Z limit switch. Okay, so just make sure that you have enough room in there for that and click OK. And we're going to say no to the toolpaths. And you'll see that I've got 2 toolpaths already set up here. It's really basic stuff. We've got a roughing toolpath. I'm going to use that 1/2 inch end mill inside that vector to go ahead and cut that down, leaving a little bit of material behind. Now, another top tip here is that I left no boundary offset. I don't want it to come up on the surface of my material, because if I did make a mistake in measuring, then I would leave a little bit of a mark around the edge, and I didn't want that. Also, if I hadn't, because I took the time to surface this, it's actually flat. But if I didn't take the time to do that, then I may have had a funny shape on the top, and that would have done exactly the same thing, left a mark. I didn't want that to happen. So top tip, no boundary offset, left a little bit of material behind. Let's go ahead and close that down, and let's preview that toolpath. Let's preview that visible toolpath, and we'll see what it is. And you'll see in the video that cut really well, really quite nice. Okay, let's close this down. Let's go on to our 3D finishing toolpath. That's going to be that 1-inch ball nose that you saw earlier. We're going to use that selected vector. Again, no boundary offset. I want it to go out the edge of that vector and then stop. I don't want it to go any farther. And because I've got that modeling plane or that zero plane in there, it's going to stop right at the top. It's not going to fall off the edge. That's perfect. We can go ahead and close that down. Nothing else special there. I did choose a raster that. I didn't want it to start in the middle and work its way out, so I did a raster, which I think was a good call in this case. Let's preview that visible toolpath. Oh, gotta turn it on, don't I? Preview that, and there we have it. That looks really good. Let's flip it over to the other side for a second, and let's take a look at those two. So again, I've already got the toolpaths created, but we'll take a look at those. This is one pocket toolpath with 2 bits in it. We're gonna start off with our 1/2-inch end mill. We're gonna move on to our bull nose. And in both cases, I can choose some different settings depending on what I've got selected. So our cut depth is gonna be 1.5 inches, which is not the 2 inches like I'd originally planned, so that's great. We're gonna use offset tooling, which is fine because we're gonna go in with a finishing toolpath and clean out all the extra material. Or not finish with another bit and clean out the other material, which is good. And that's all nice, and we can go ahead and calculate that. Oh, let's just go ahead and calculate that. And then we can preview that toolpath. We're not gonna preview the second one yet. We'll just look at the first one. See what that looks like. That looks really good. It's a nice flat shape. Nothing fancy about that. Okay, let's close that down. Let's go back into that same toolpath again and look at that bull nose. Everything here is set up nicely. We're gonna use a climb profile. I don't think it matters because it's an end grain, so I'm not worried about it. At some point it's gonna rub the wrong way against the grain. We're not gonna worry about that. That's fine. There's no pocket allowance. We're gonna leave it at 0. We can calculate that. Let's preview that visible toolpath. And you'll see it's gonna come in and just do the edges and give me this shape in the end. Now again, because these are not 2 3D components, I can't really see much. I don't understand that there's an actual log here around the outside edge, but what I can do is do exactly the same thing I did with the servers. If I hover over the middle, because it's a 2-sided job, I've got both sides being previewed, hold down my control key, I can see down in the bottom right-hand corner how thick that's gonna be in the center. And it's gonna be about 1.1, 1.14 inches thick, which I think is gonna be a nice thickness to hold this together. One of my concerns was that if I got too thin, because I'm cutting into this, into the grain, it might break apart. But I think with that thickness, it should be totally fine. Okay, so there we have it. That's pretty much all we need to do now to go over to the machine and cut this out. So let's have a look at how this cut out on the CNC machine. And then also how I finished it in the end, which you'll see it's got an epoxy on it. I tried my best to use this. It was the same epoxy that I used to fill the cracks with. I've learned a lot about that, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of that when we get back after you see this being cut and finished. So with regards to the finish of this one, I love the way the bowl turned out. The epoxy that I used, this is my first time ever using this sort of thing on a finish. I didn't realize that the wood would actually soak up as much of the epoxy as it did. So it looks quite rough on the top edge, which I'm gonna fix. So during the live session, I'm gonna have this there and we can take a look at hopefully a much nicer looking finished part. I'm hoping that any of you out there have some good ideas of how I could make this better first time around. I would love to hear how I could do that. But overall, I'm really happy with it. And I think that with another coat of epoxy, a little bit of sanding, I think it's gonna look brilliant in the end. I have not much to say about the servers. I'm really happy with the way those turned out. Like, I could not be any happier. I hope that out of all the things, if you guys decide to purchase the pack that comes along with this UGM, you take the time to make these because they really are quite nice. Yeah, they're great. So I guess that's pretty much it for this project, or both projects. I hope you enjoyed that. Please stay tuned for our live segments. If you have any questions, please make sure they're in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those during the live segments if we can. If you are interested in making those, like I said, you can download or purchase, and then download the pack that comes along with this year's user group meeting, which will include these projects and tons of other stuff from our other presenters. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the user group meeting and I can't wait to see what you make in the future.